live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Linux user group. This is the second one for March. So, if you are watching this live, the link to join is pinned in the chat room. I also tweeted it out on Mastodon. It's in the Discord. So, if you want to join, you can join. If not, you can stay watching. Or if you're watching after the fact, the stream will stay up and live and all that stuff, so you can watch it all the way through. It won't go away like the podcast. We don't edit this. Nate would probably murder me in my sleep. If I said, "Hey, Nate, let's edit the lug." It's just, he would quit and move to Canada or someplace. Well, somewhere warmer, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, so welcome everybody. I hope we're gonna have a fantastic time. We have a wonderful topic. So I believe that the way that I worded it on the stream was debunking Linux stereotypes. So things that Windows users think about Linux that they get dead wrong, and other people too. They want to limit it to Windows users. So I will go first as usual. Then you guys can just raise your hands as you want to jump in. We can have a conversation and or move to another one. Just go with the flow as we normally do. So my first one is that you can't do any work on Linux. There's this stupid thing that a lot of people think that you can't. If you use Linux, you're just sitting around racing all day long or messing around in the terminal or fixing problems. You can't get anything done, and that's just not at all true. Now, I actually do have a video that is recorded about this very topic, but the way I think I put it in there is that there are certain things that it is true for. Like if you do CAD, you probably can't use Linux very well. If you do something that is very entrenched in Adobe, you're not going to be able to use Linux all that well. But for most everybody else, music is another one that's kind of iffy. So if you're a producer of music, Linux could probably be a place where you can't do as much as you could on Windows or Mac. But for the most everybody else, you can do as much work on it as you want to. Fraggle, you definitely had your hand up first. I don't know why War Thunder went first. Go ahead.
Wouldn't have mattered to me anyway. But to go off of what you said about music production and stuff like that, Linux is fine for music production. You can use LMMS as just a base to start, but if you really want to get in depth, a good DAW is called Ardor. Really, really high quality, really robust and in depth. Works really, really well. Rose Garden's another one, but it's super complicated. But I mean, some of the misconceptions are like where Linux is free to use or FOSS, that it's sometimes perceived as inferior, just because of, it's one of those things, like it's too good to be true in some ways. Like if it's free, it can't be that good. There has to be something wrong with it if it's free, which is a really common misconception.
Which is always entertaining to me because, I mean, granted, it didn't always, obviously, it wasn't always this way, but at least nowadays, Windows and Mac are free too, right? You don't have to pay for those. Now, the cost is built into the hardware and all that stuff, but still, you don't go buy a Windows CD anymore like you used to. So maybe that stereotype will eventually go away a little bit with the.
A lot of people do still buy Windows activation keys, though. A lot of people do.
Well, a lot of nerds do, like but regular people don't. So, I mean, I suppose like the stereotype might live on with the people who build their own computers, but the good fucking Lord Zany. That's awesome. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. But you're right that the Windows key scene is still going to be around. War Thunder, you're next.
Oh, I was going to say real quick, I didn't realize the thing was joining us today. So hi, Tyler. No, I was going to say it was more of a thing a few years ago or whatnot. And I just ran into somebody I play games with regularly that didn't realize that you could play games on Linux. They didn't think that was like a thing or whatnot. And we've been playing a literal metric butt ton of Star Citizen, which is hilarious because the game's in alpha and you're shoving it through Proton. So there are some fun problems as a result of that, but there's just a lot of, like I said, just talking to him multiple times, he was like, I didn't realize you could play games on Linux. And I'm like, yeah. And sometimes you get a performance edge, sometimes you don't. More often than not, it's about the same, a little bit behind, but for the most part, you pick your computer up and you click install and it works like you expect it to work for the most part. Unless you got an anti-cheat, in which case, you're like me and you boot into Windows for like 2 games that you play that the developers are buttholes.
I must be like the only person who just says, if you can't make a game that works on Linux, then I'm just not gonna play your game. Like that's just me, right? I just,
Yeah, I have a couple of anti-cheats. I have one that's a weird interaction between the Glide API and DXVK that doesn't quite work right. So there's a workaround that patches the Glide D3D to run through just regular DXVK. It's a really weird niche problem, but there are some older games that is an issue with. It's getting better though.
for I don't know why I even ever comment on the gaming stuff. I only ever play one game anyways, and it's Hearthstone. I wish that were easier to install on Linux, but other than that, that's the only thing I can ever comment on. Cody, go ahead.
Yeah, there's at this point it's been easier for me to work on Linux than it is on Windows, and like that was largely due to just for some reason with my hardware, Windows was just really unstable for some reason. When I was given the computer that I have, it just Windows was constantly breaking on it, and uh, Linux for the most part pretty dang smooth. So I spend less time fixing problems, less time trying to customize things. I got things figured out. I backed up some configs, and then oh hey, what do you know? I don't have to worry about the customization for a long time from there. Um, like plenty of utilities to do just about everything, minus the one thing I was complaining about in user chat earlier today. But for the most part, like yeah, it's like I go to Linux to get work done. Windows just gets in my way at this point. And so yeah, but for another thing that is a stereotype, um I already forgot it. It left my mind. So all right, just move on.
It's okay if you come back to it. You just raise your hand. I do have a question for you though. Do you think that the reason why you find Linux easier, and I know the answer for this for me, but I'm curious what you think. Do you think the reason why you find Linux smoother to use is just because you're more familiar with it now? If you went back and lived in Windows for a while, that would then take place of being the smooth thing.
No, I still know how to use Windows and Mac OS extremely well. Maybe I'm not as good as I used to be now that I haven't been in user support, general troubleshooting like I used to be in years past, but I mean, I know them all pretty dang well. Linux I know the least actually.
Mm.
Like most of you guys here know way more about Linux than me. I love stealing your line of forever a noob. I've been using Linux on and off for like a decade and a half almost. It's kind of crazy. No, it's really more closer to just a decade, but like no, it's just a matter of I've been able to get certain things with very minimal effort to work in a way that works better for me. There's a number of utilities that like I just can't live without anymore. I go to Windows and it's like I can't do this or I can't do that, or the utilities I have to use to do certain things, I have to jump through a bunch of extra hoops. There is very, very few exceptions to that. I took out my Windows secondary drive from this computer over like a year and a half ago, and have not regretted it.
See, for me, I'm extremely rusty when it comes to Windows. So I still have one Windows PC in my family, and that's my mom. And she's never changing, and that's fine. I mean, she's 81, almost 81 years old. So she's just not interested in changing, and that's fine. As much as I preach at her and tell her it's not fine, it actually is fine. But I do the service on that laptop, and every time I go to do it, I find myself less and less knowledgeable about what Windows does. So the last time I got on there, it just shocked me how much Windows had changed since the last time I'd actually done anything on it. Because before she was on 10, now she's on 11, And while it's not that much different, there's things moving in different places. There's so many more advertisements on there than there ever was before. It just felt really weird, and I felt so out of place. And that was a very jarring experience because I used to use Windows full time, and going back to it for a little while, even though it was for like a day, it was like, this is completely different than what I remember, even though it still looks basically the same. Um, Arch Penguin, go ahead.
Yeah. So mine is, I think a lot of people tend to think that all, Arch users are elitist gatekeepers and that you should go read the manual. And I don't think that's true. I think a lot of that is hype from like Reddit. You get all these kids and they're just back and forth, and a lot of people see Reddit, and that's another misconception, and they just think that that's what the Linux community is like. Which, man, please don't think that they represent all of us, because that's just a niche amount of people. That doesn't really represent everyone, right? For the most part, as long as you don't ask really stupid questions. I mean, like, don't if you do zero effort, then you will probably get, hey, you need to learn how to ask a better question. But other than that, I really think that there's a big misconception about a lot of Arch users.
Well, I think one of the problems is when it comes to assholes in the Linux community is that they're very loud, right? And the people who are loud, and they're often very participatory in everything. Like, they have their claws in Arch Linux and all the forums and the Discords and the IRCs. That's where they tend to hang out, and because they're all over the place, they tend to be the ones that are first to respond to every question. And when people see those loud people responding in the way that they do, and we all have seen it, it paints a bad picture on everybody. So this is something I've talked about before. It's just the amount of people in the Linux community who are actually like that is very, very small. But because they are so seem to be everywhere and are the first to respond to everything, they seem to be a much larger group than they actually are. Tyler, go ahead.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, sorry. Tyler?
Well, I was going to say,
Very, very soft, man. You got to turn yourself up.
oh, hold on. Uh, why am I soft? Hold on. I mean, I'm running this Debian stuff. Let me try. Let me try doing this.
You
Is
might
this
just.
any better?
Yes. Yep. Yeah.
Much better. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. 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 Well, so I would say like hardware support as well as software support is one of the things that gets commonly said is like people make it out to be much worse than it is. Um, Clearly, I'm running a VR headset right now. I've been playing around with a whole bunch of different stuff. I don't know if you know it or not, but there are a whole bunch of virtual environments made for Linux where you can have a desktop setup. And like, here's a really cool thing. If you have a VR headset and you don't have extra monitors, a lot of these virtual environments allow you to create virtual devices like they were hooked up to your display outputs, and then you can have a multi-monitor setup without actually having to have one. Um, I've been using this. Pulse Audio works just fine. Pipewire works just fine. I would say better, but I don't really know. Both work just fine. Um, Test out a whole bunch of different stuff, and on Debian works just fine. So you can run the old stable packages and have a VR experience. It's kind of crazy.
So are
It's
you
very
doing that
nice.
right now where you have like multiple monitors in front of you with your VR?
Um, I was, but I'm using pass through right now, mainly just because when I'm typing and stuff, I get, or well, actually, just in general, I have like this cool skeleton overlay over my hands, and I'm just doing that because I like it. Um, by the way, if you are interested in ALVR, it works, or like VR in Linux. ALVR is a really good program to use. It's open source. It's very nice, and it works great. It's got a whole bunch of extra features, and it works with any headset. So, like anyone, it's great.
So Linux has arrived. We have VR now. Dunnan,
Mhm.
go ahead.
Yeah, some people say have the idea that Linux is difficult to use, but in in time, I think that for me, Linux has become more easier to use than Windows. I use a GNOME based Linux distro, and you can scroll in the corner to switch screens. So, but when I go to school and use the Windows 11 computer, I unconsciously try to scroll at the corner to switch windows. But then it takes me a few minutes to realize that I'm using Windows, and I also like I have to focus when I'm using the Windows computer at school. So I don't know if that's because I get so used to using that I have hard time to use Windows. Huh.
Well, it's a different paradigm for sure, and I that when you were talking, it made me think. If we could just get everyone to use Linux during their school years, they would use Linux for life because they could never go back to Windows, and uh, they'd be lost. So yeah, I think that's a good point. And familiarity definitely breeds the ability to be more familiar with something. So familiarity breeds the ability to be
But
familiar with something. That was great,
but
man. Go ahead.
it's the thing that a lot of people relate Linux users to be highly knowledgeable in computers. Yes, there are people that are highly knowledgeable in computers that use Linux, but there are people like me who are pretty average, has pretty average knowledge when it comes to computers. So I don't use the difficult distros. I don't use Arch I or anything similar to that. I use a distro that just works right off the box.
That's great. Cody, go ahead.
Yeah, so comment on the past couple. It doesn't work with hardware or software. Yeah, that used to be a lot more of the case like a decade ago, but it's gotten so much better because a lot of times many Linux distros out of the box just would not work with most wireless adapters, a number of various peripherals, all that sort of stuff. That largely has been solved, not in all cases, of course, but a lot of devices just work. um, I know a long while ago, Stream Decks did not work very well with Linux, and then I saw Matt's picture of they use the Stream Deck, and it's just like, oh yeah, they probably work great now, and apparently they do. So that's awesome. Love to see that. Software too, and we can thank Valve for quite a bit of the recent efforts on that. But the Wine teams and otherwise have been working on getting stuff working better for a long time, and it's a cumulative effort. So it just over time is getting better and better and better for older stuff, and newer stuff is always going to be kind of iffy, but we're in a better position than we've ever been before. Then Linux users being highly knowledgeable in computers. Like, that's a common problem with any sort of computer stuff. People think coders automatically are amazing with all computer stuff and whatnot, whereas like a lot of the coders I personally know can't do most basic troubleshooting stuff with their computers. They don't know basic functions in Windows. They don't know a ton of stuff. People get their specializations essentially. And so just because someone is a Linux user, that like you can't expect them to be highly knowledgeable in computers. There is a higher chance, yes, the probability is higher, but it's not a guarantee. Absolutely. So the thing that I wanted to bring up is that uh, there's a lot of stereotype of you got to use the terminal. Like, you can't get around not using the terminal. Like people live in the terminal. You have to use the terminal. And while that's the case for a number of distros, there's a number of them where you don't really. And I'm going to be setting up multiple people with Linux in the next year or so, and they're never going to have to use the terminal. I'm going to set them up with something like Kinoite or something like that, and they're just going to get their apps from the app manager like Discover. They're going to do their web browser. They're going to run their apps, and it's going to update, and they're going to reboot. That's just going to be normal. They're not going to have to touch the terminal at all. I tried not to touch the terminal too terribly much. I'm not afraid of it, but I just prefer to do things in a GUI. I prefer to click one button that does a dozen things rather than type things out. I prefer having things arranged in certain ways that are better visually for me than I tend to get in a number of terminal-based stuff. But yeah, I still mess around on the terminal from time to time, but largely, no, I'm rarely touching it.
By the way, that was mine. I'm really upset that you stole it, but that's that's okay. I'm gonna mispronounce your name for sure. Galpos. I don't know how to.
Yeah, it's Galpos.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know if this is a stereotype, but sometimes I feel like in the Linux community, people try to seem like or show that Linux is the solution for all your problems, and you should use Linux all the time for everything. And for example, I'm on Windows right now, and honestly, I like Windows. It works well for me, and I don't have any reason to switch to Linux other than that I like tech and privacy concerns and all of that. But yeah, I don't know how to say this, but it's sometimes hard for people that aren't in this space to have a reason to switch to Linux, especially when you have many options like, oh, use Pop OS or use Linux Mint, or so people get very confused. So I don't know what I'm trying to say, but just wanted to bring up this.
I think I got you. I think for a lot of us, Linux is something that you need a catalyst to use. And some people are just nerds and they want to use Linux. That's the case for a lot of people. But some more, I would say, normie people, they have to have a catalyst, something that kicks them in the butt to get them to want to change away from what they use, and that doesn't always happen. In fact, it hardly ever happens, right? So,
because for me, even that I'm tech guy and I love all this stuff and programming, I'm fine with Windows. Honestly, it works fine and it covers all I need. So I just want to switch to Linux for privacy concerns and try new things. But yeah,
it's a good thing to have. Yeah. All right. Fraggle, go ahead.
Just to agree with or go back to like what Cody was saying about like hardware compatibility, as well as War Thunder with gaming and everything like that. I think, 10-ish years ago, 8 to 10 years ago, a lot of people on average tried using Linux, and it just wasn't in a place where it was as usable as it is even today. Even just that long ago, the UIs and everything they looked really outdated too. So like that long ago, the best you could get was something that maybe looked like Windows Vista or Windows 7. Most of it looked like Windows 98 type of stuff. It's come a long way in that amount of time. I think that people believe that Linux is only usable on like lower end or older hardware and stuff like that, because a lot of people use it to restore or to preserve the longevity of older hardware or lower end systems for friends or for family, just that they can get more use out of it. But it's not necessarily that Linux is stuck there or anything like that. I think that Linux in many ways is more on the forefront of technological advancement in more ways than Windows or Mac OS will ever be. just because of how customizable, robust, and flexible Linux is. Yeah, I think that's a big misconception, is that it's just for lower end or older hardware.
Yeah, another good one. Orange Penguin, go ahead.
Yeah, so we got a big misconception that some people have about a certain thing. Some people think that NixOS isn't a distro.
Some people know that for a fact. Being trolled on my own user group. Drew, go ahead.
We friends are our own worst enemy. We nerds are making it very difficult on ourselves. We go in front of people and we say, look how cool I am. I installed Gen 2 on a potato running off solar power, and it's intimidating and gatekeepy. And let's be real, it's a little unhinged, frankly. And so we as elitists, we are our own worst enemy when we say that it's like, hey, I installed Arch on no internet using only a fax machine and sheer willpower or something, you know. For the average person, friends, it is not impressive. It is terrifying. And so when we say it's for everyone, Linux is for everyone, it's not, it truly is. But when we say I daily drive Wayland on a mechanical keyboard, I hand soldered myself while writing a window manager in NeoVim, it is a bad look. It is a bad look, and no one knows that grandma could easily run like Linux Mint or Pop OS or anything like that and have zero problems. That there's this misconception. That's all I'm gonna say.
The mechanical keyboard thing was a low blow, Drew.
It was a little dig, just a little one though, you know.
Yeah, sure. Someone ban that guy for me, would you? Hip Dad, please.
Well, coming from the ancestral roots of Linux, my first Linux experience was Slackware, Debian, Red Hat back in '93. And the reason I went to it was somebody said something about it in a IRC channel, and I was trying to get Windows 95 to work properly on a Pentium 60, and you had to run it in compatibility mode. And if you didn't run it in compatibility mode, you couldn't play games in compatibility mode. So I had to literally send my BIOS chip to a guy in California and have it flash so it wouldn't do the compatibility mode thing. But my experience back then is there was a lot of people that were willing to help. There was less, you need to read the manual, because there wasn't a lot of manuals. But back then I was actually compiling my own Red Hat kernels and all that. And so, I was actually probably learning more, a deeper dive into Linux back then than I am now, because Linux is so much easier. Sometimes I want to go back to the old compiling kernels and stuff like that, but I'm not chomping at the bit to do it though.
Have you thought about using Gen 2, Hip Dad?
I tried it once and I said, no, we're not going to do that.
I think that's most people's response to it. Dunnan, go ahead.
Yes, Drew mentioned that it looks scary for ordinary people when make Linux look complicated and difficult, because people value conveniency, and when it comes to gaming, I installed a Linux distro called the Peak OS, and it came with all the things you need for gaming pre-installed, like Proton Plus. I didn't have to do anything, and that's also the distro my brother is going to install now when Windows going to stop supporting Windows 10, because his computer cannot update to Windows 11. So that's what I want to say.
Okay. Yeah, it's definitely reputation of Linux does definitely have that kind of uh, thing that precedes it. Des, go ahead.
When you say I run Mint, but I daily drive my own UPM, people really don't know what you're talking about because most people don't know what a UPM is right now. I bet you guys won't know unless you followed my conversations.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with no clue what you're talking about. I read some of your stuff, but not all of it. Cody, go ahead.
I have no idea what the UPM is, but I'm gonna post in the chat the ones that have been brought up so far. Um, yeah, Linux is the solution for all issues. Like that is definitely a stereotype that gets thrown around a little bit because well, there are some problems that honestly do get solved by moving to Linux. But at the same time, that's definitely not the solution for everything, and not all Linux users are throwing that around. Then there's the gatekeeping, the toxic gatekeeping, and while like you do see that pretty heavily in certain Linux user groups, I don't tend to see that nearly as much in this one, luckily, and that's unfortunately just a thing for people in general. People gatekeep on stuff all the time, everywhere. I'm not going to say it's not entirely a problem in Linux communities because it is somewhat of a problem, but it's a problem in pretty much all communities almost everywhere to varying degrees.
True. Um, okay, so no one has their hand up. I'm gonna jump in front of you for just a second, Drew, and just this is kind of a conglomeration of what some other people say, but I wrote this down. There's a stereotype that people in the Unix r/Unix porn are normal users, and I just want to say that that's absolutely not true. So if you have your impressions of Linux from Unix porn, you're going to be sorely mistaken on what a normal Linux user is. Drew, go ahead.
I think there's this misconception also that Linux distros are exactly the same across the board. You know, it's like, oh, if I try one, I tried them all. And that is just not true because Ubuntu is not Arch, is not Fedora, is not Void, is not Gentoo, is not Puppy Linux, is not Debian. You know, they are they're so different in the way they approach usability and desktop. You know, some of them are desktop, some of them are not. So when I look at, I think that there is this terrible misconception that if you try one, you've tried them all. So if that one doesn't hit, then you're in trouble. I mean, then we've lost potentially another Linux user going forward. But, again, I think it's all on us to genuinely help guide some of these people who are like, because from a conversation that I had with D-Dubs very recently, it was all about like so many people jumping from Windows to Arch so that they could run Hyperland. And that just seems like a big leap, going from like Windows to Hyperland is not straightforward. There should be some middle ground there. God bless them for trying, seriously, but I would imagine that the success rate is somewhat low.
Do you think that there's a balance there to be had though? Because there's a not distro hopping enough because you think that you use one and it doesn't work, therefore you should go back to Windows. So you should distro hop more. But there's also those people, and I was one of them for a long time, where you just distro hop for no apparent reason because there was a snap directory in your home directory and you couldn't get rid of it, so you had to go somewhere else. That was an actual reason I hopped one time. So do you think that there's a balance with that stereotype then?
Yeah, definitely. I also think, and we talked a little bit about this, maybe it was this past week on the podcast, was we all kind of like chase perfection. And when we're okay, so I'm not a Windows user, but if I perceive Windows as the only game in town for a really long time, and then I follow it if I try something else and it's not perfect, then either I'm running back or I'm distro hopping in a significant way, because if I'm going to use something, I might as well use the best thing, So I don't know. When we all kind of chase that perfect distro, that perfect desktop environment, that perfect, I don't know that it's actually falls into the topic that we're talking about, but I think that it is a problem and maybe there's a stereotype that I can't switch because I just don't have the skills to switch.
Yeah.
I just don't have that within me, and I don't really care. I just flat out don't even care, because all I'm really doing, and at the end of the day, is doing a browser. I'm using Google Docs. I'm using Chrome, and that's pretty much it. And I can get to Amazon.
Yeah.
I'm good.
The funny thing about distro hopping is at least the way that I used to distro hop when I first started using Linux was, if something went wrong, I would distro hop, right? And I think that a lot of people do that, but a lot of people on Windows see that kind of behavior and think, well, that's not how you solve things. But the funny thing is that that's exactly how you solve things on Windows, right? Right? If Windows breaks, everyone knows this. What you do is nuke and pave. That's what you do. There's no fixing Windows. I mean, unless you're like a Windows guru, or you have a Windows guru on hand. Most people, when something goes wrong, they either buy a new laptop, take it to Geek Squad, or nuke and pave if they know how to do that. So it's weird because that's
go ahead. Sorry, the last thing I was going to say was, though, early on in the LUG, somebody mentioned that it can't, and I can't remember who, but someone said that Linux can't be good because it's free. And that is, this price bias thing is in all facets of our society. It's like, if it's the cheapest thing, it can't be good. It has to be the most expensive thing, and that is just, we have to get over that kind of like price bias with Linux, and people are going to have to understand, oh, you mean NASA and Google and the International Space Station uses it? Holy shit, maybe it is good then.
Where that goes next is that if it doesn't have a subscription price, it's bad, because we're going to go to a point where there's no price for something. Everything has a subscription, and Linux won't have one. And they'll look at it like, well, if it doesn't have a subscription, it obviously can't be good. Omega Text, go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, yeah, no, what I was going to say is, one of the stereotypes that I get when I tell people I use Linux, oh, you're a hobbyist. They think that if you use Linux, it's just a hobby OS. You're not on a Mac, or you're not on a Windows PC. And I keep telling them, no, it's not a hobby. I use it for work and for production and for play. A lot of the other stereotypes, if you're a gamer, you have to use Windows. That is, I think it's a big stereotype, because if you're a gamer, you could play on a Steam Deck. You could put Bazite OS in your system and play games. If you're a competitive gamer, then maybe you're not a Linux user. But I hate when I told some guy who works in IT, he's like, yeah, man. I was like, hey, I was all impressed that he worked at the university IT department. And I was like, hey, man, do you use Linux? And he looked at me like weird. And I'm like, no. He's like, that's just for hobbyists. I'm like, dude, I've been running Linux for, I forget how long. I said, man, and what got me to the using Linux is just like what's going to happen to Windows 10. I bought what I considered a badass Dell computer, and I spent over like $2,500 for it. I used it for years for work, and then all of a sudden I was upgrading Windows, and it says, oh, you can't upgrade to the next Windows. And I'm like, what do you mean? This thing cost me almost $2,500 and I can't use it. So when I knew about Linux, and I downloaded a distro, and I was like, I still use that computer to this day. I mean, it's not my main machine, but it, using, and what you're all considered old hardware, it's not old hardware. All the stuff that we throw into the e-waste it's still great hardware, but it's the consumerism of the American market is, oh, we need the latest and greatest. We need the next iPhone 16, 17, or whatever's next. But the stereotype that I always come across is that you're a hobbyist and you're not a gamer because you're not using Windows. And I'm like, dude, I've been using my Steam Deck since it came out. I could play any game you can, with some exceptions. That's because of the anti-cheat. But the games I've played are great. I mean, I'm an old Commodore 64 guy where, you just played Commodore 64 and, you'd make a floppy disk dual-sided by putting a notch in it. But I hate that when Linux users or operating systems is a hobbyist type thing. I think we're beyond the hobbyist market. Steam Deck really moved that needle forward. I mean, it was in that direction, but like someone said earlier, NASA uses it, Google uses it, all the major, Meta uses it. I mean, they've been using, the Unix Linux kernel for production stuff, making money off it. But are we a hobbyist? I don't know. I just think that's a stereotype. Would you guys consider being a Linux user a hobbyist OS, or are we? I know we're not mainstream, but do you take offense if we call it a hobby using Linux?
What does
That's all I have to
Android
say.
use? Just putting that out there. What does Android use?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think the problem with the Steam Deck and with Android is that people don't know they're using Linux. I would love to see Valve put a poll out for Steam Deck users to ask, do you realize that you're using Linux? Because I bet you the vast majority of them don't know that they're using it. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe most of them do know and just don't care. But I would bet you that most of them just don't know at all.
I'd like to see one of your polls on one of your a poll, not just here in this group, but a poll in one of your YouTube videos is Linux use a hobby, or is it I don't know what to use the word as a hobby, but a production stuff. I mean, I watch a lot of YouTubers that use Linux, and I don't think they call it a hobbyist, but I don't know how to overcome that stereotype. And this is guys who work in IT that, manage servers for a living, even though they're probably Windows servers for the university. And again, I'm trying to get to that stereotype is the stereotype that Linux users are hobbyists.
Yeah, that IT guy who thought that is going to have a hard time finding a job when he goes elsewhere because he's going to come across Linux.
He's actually the director. He's been in IT a long time,
yeah.
But he's just stuck in the Windows ecosystem. The Windows NT. I mean, and again, in the education market, when Windows was the only game in town for networking, I think they're just entrenched and they've never moved forward. But he's been doing it a long time. I mean, he's the director of that. All the servers there at the university. So yeah, I don't think he's going anywhere. So I don't think he's going to change jobs, but he's been there at least 20 years.
Dunnan, go ahead.
No, I also want to address to Omega text that for me, using Linux is definitely not a hobby. It's more of me using a normal computer, for daily use, And the reason why I use Linux with GNOME is that I found navigating the desktop environment to be more convenient than Windows, actually. But I also want to address, I think a barrier for some people to start using Linux is that they are afraid to even open up the boot menu, right? And many people think also that the only way to get to use Linux is to open up the boot menu and boot the computer on a live boot USB. But there is some computers that come with Linux pre-installed. There are not many, but having more of those would be helpful to get more people to use it.
Yeah, for sure. My question is, just to go off what Omega Text was saying, was why can't it be both? For me, it's both. Like, I use my computer to do my work. I have a job that allows me to use Linux to do it, and I also consider it a hobby because I do racing on it, and I mess around with bash scripts that don't really do anything for productivity, and I watched Drew install Debian 600 times. Those things are fun for me, and therefore it's a hobby. But I also do work for it, so I don't. It's like a car. I mean, a car gets you from A to B, but it can also be a hobby. I mean, they have car shows and all that stuff. So I mean, I don't know why it can't be both. Nerdgasm, go ahead.
It's a way of life.
Put that
But
on
no,
a T-shirt.
yeah, no, but really, for whether or not it's a hobby, definitely it comes down to how you're using it, what are you using when, and whatnot. And like I would say, if Linux is the operating system that is running on your primary computer, then it's probably not just a hobby. It can also be a hobby, as you were saying, but it's not just a hobby. Like yeah, so that's a big thing. I also put an updated list in the chat. Yeah, the Unix porn posters being all what normal Linux users are, absolutely not true. Of course, that is clearly obvious on its face. I mean, even if you look at the look at that subreddit, their description even is the home for Nix customization now. So like that's even such an even smaller subset of Linux users that like please people do not think that is the face of all Linux users.
They don't mean Nix as in like the Nix OS. They mean Unix.
Oh god, that's totally obvious, and I'm just stupid because I'm seeing Nix everywhere elsewise anymore. But that's a whole other thing. So all right, but yeah, distro hoppers just hopping because they're not trying to fix issues. That is definitely true to some extent. Like there is a lot of times people will just not want to fix an issue and just hop. Because, well, wait, what do you know? Some issues are kind of big, and it's going to take a lot of work to figure it out, or you might need to actually submit bugs and do like real work fixing stuff. It's not just like, oh, small config change or something like that. That can be the case sometimes. But yeah, the point of like what you do with Windows, just wipe it and reinstall. I would say that's more of a thing than it used to be back in like XP prior, Vista prior, even 7 and prior. I think it's gotten a little bit easier to just reinstall than it used to be with Windows because of the way it handles installing over itself and the Windows.old folder and some of the settings and stuff being tied to OneDrive or other cloud backup stuff. So just reinstalling Windows and getting back to where you were is a lot quicker than it used to be back in the day. So I would say like, yeah, Windows problems, just reinstall. That is a somewhat more recent thing. But yeah, and then gamers can't be using Linux. Like, yeah, Valve has clearly destroyed that in the last couple years. That stereotype is on its way out. There's definitely still a number of people who believe it, but that number is getting smaller and smaller all the time. I've definitely had numerous people like, oh no, I couldn't run this or that. I had so many problems. Like, dude, that was 8 years ago. Here's Proton DB. It's gold rated. Come on, it'll work just fine now. But yeah, so like we can definitely thank Valve quite a bit for destroying the whole Linux users can't be gamers sort of thing. Yeah.
Okay, good ending. Hip Dad, go ahead.
Well, I think in the beginning is what separated everything to where the acceptance of anything other than Windows and Mac was established when everybody, the media and Microsoft itself and Apple itself referred to Windows as a PC and Apple as a Mac or Mac as an Apple or whatever. But the thing is that's not the truth. A Mac is a PC. It's a personal computer. That's what PC means. A Windows computer is a PC. It's a personal computer. Linux, it's on a PC. It's personal computer. The establishment of when somebody says, do you want a PC or a Mac? basically said there's no other thing than Windows or Mac. It just pretty much told the general public there's nothing else but Windows or Mac, because they took over the acronym of PC. When I mean that's a big idiosyncrasy of mine. I even had a Twitter account, and it might even still be there, called PC is not Windows, and it's just a fact. I mean, Commodore, personal computer. I mean, Amiga, personal computer. I mean, they're all personal computers. They just have different operating systems. But people don't want to hear it because it was established way back in the early 80s.
Yeah. Fraggle, go ahead.
I just want to loop back on what Omega Tech said, like that he was talking to like an IT professional, does it as a career. And when he asked if they run Linux, he kind of got like side-eyed or weird looked, stuff like that. Like, I think maybe that leads into a misconception that devs, sysadmins, or people that run Linux are in the IT industry, or people in the IT industry run Linux, and it's just not the case. Even when you're going through schooling, post-secondary, university or college, most of those courses teach Microsoft services like Active Directory instead of LDAP. Like, there's great Linux alternatives to setting up huge networks, and alternatives to Active Directory and stuff like that. But that's just not what's taught for the most part in school. And I think that those stereotypes are slowly going away. More so in like the animating or like production type careers, with Blender now to being like a big chunk, or almost taking the lead of being the industry standard for 3D animation, and like CGI type of work, more so than like Autodesk Maya or anything like that. So yeah, but that's a pretty big stereotype, and it's funny because when most of the people that I've talked to that are in or around the IT industry, they're Windows or Mac. A lot of devs use Mac more so than anything else. But people outside of those industries or outside of that culture think that they all run or they must use Linux for development or for IT purposes, and it's just not the case.
Yeah, I think we miss when you hear that 2 billion people or whatever the number is use Windows. It's hard to recognize that the gulf between the number that use Windows and the number that use Mac and the number who use Linux is very vast. Sometimes when we use Linux, we feel like there's a lot of us, but in the grand scheme of things, we're just a pretty small community, right? So, Des, go ahead.
The ability to reinstall quicker is one of the reasons I stuck with Linux on my main PC, because until Windows starts using a package manager for its primary way of installing things, rather than just going out and getting a random exe or MSI, then it isn't going to reinstall as quickly and get it set up as quickly as Linux.
Omega Text, go ahead.
Yeah, just to follow up, and I think you're right, Fraggle. I was stereotyping the network guy, the IT guy. I assumed if you work in IT, you would use Linux, but you're right. I think my reverse stereotype was that I consider it a hobby as well as production, the use of Linux as you're running OS. But again, I guess we have to distinguish Linux desktop and then Linux servers. And so that's where I assumed wrong that the IT guy on his personal desktop would use a Linux distro, but they're so stuck in the, like you said, the education field where they teach Windows, NT, and all those old certifications or the certifications they keep, is that I was pigeonholing that IT guy as a Linux user, not just Linux server, but Linux OS, or excuse me, Linux desktop user. So I think I stereotype the guy as someone like us who uses it and sees the freedom of not using a locked-in proprietary OS, as in Mac or in Windows. Now Windows 11 is going to be the new standard. But I was reverse pigeonholing him. But, oh, okay, you're the IT guy. What do you run on your personal computer? I thought he would run, a Fedora or a Debian or whatever. And I was pigeonholing that IT guy. Because, again, you're absolutely right. You watch coders, and they're all using Macs, and, they're using, I guess, what works for them. And that's what I see. I mean, you use what works for your production or for your hobby. If you're stuck in the competitive gaming world, you're going to be stuck in the Windows world. So I think Fraggle is right. I just saw that I was stereotyping the IT guy, assuming that he would use a Linux. And, I want to talk to him about, I was going to say, hey, man, what do you use on the daily basis pretty much for your home computer? Because I wanted to talk, Fedora. I wanted to talk Debian, what programs he uses. And he's like, no, man, that's what bothered me. He's like, no, I don't use Linux on my personal computer. That's just for hobbyists. And that's kind of where I took a little side out, like, really? I don't consider myself a hobbyist, but I saw his point that, because he didn't want to tinker, in the command line or, mess with your computer every day. And I enjoy it. And yeah, like Matt said, I've considered both a hobby as well as getting stuff done, getting work done. But to this IT guy, using Linux desktop, it was just for hobbyists. And I keep going back to what you said, is I stereotyped him thinking that all IT guys were running Linux on their personal computers, which they're not. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Drew, go ahead.
I zoned out for a second. Okay, so I wanted to mention that there is this, I think, misconception. I don't know that it's a stereotype, but there's the misconception that if I cannot use Microsoft Office, I can't work. And that is so, I mean, in today's, I think I want to ask the person who says that, so what level are you actually using Word or Excel? Because I guarantee you most of them use what 10% of the capability that Microsoft Word or Excel has, and and they're paying 100% of the price. They're only using 10% of the features, 100% of the price. So there's that 90% where they're not even doing anything with they're not doing anything very intricate or anything like that. And so you could use LibreOffice or only Office or even Google Docs, for God's sake.
Microsoft Word and the web or whatever it is, right?
Yeah. I mean, but okay, so most people are just going to Word and they're typing hello, and then they say center, text, bold. Any freaking buddy can do that. I mean, and any of these documents can, any of these other Linux, LibreOffice, and so on can do exactly the same thing and save it as a docx file.
I think it's that people have a misconception about, Drew. They don't realize that these other things can save it as, because a lot of companies or whatever require you to send a document as docx, so they think that you have to have Word in order to do that. So they don't know. So maybe LibreOffice needs to make it more well known that they can send it as a doc, or save it as a docx or something like that. I don't
but
know.
even if, I think there's this misconception and that it's necessary. It's really necessary. what are they actually sending that has to be even in that file format? I don't know. It's just, it infuriates me because like a text file is just as good for me, at least. I don't know if it's for everybody, but it doesn't have to be, I don't know. I guess it doesn't have to be that pretty. And if it needs to be that pretty, learn Markdown for God's sakes. You know?
Drew, you're such an elitist, man.
I am.
I know.
I really am.
Yeah. RBM has left our community, so I have to call someone an elitist. Before we move on, Hank Offlameo, I'm not sure if I butchered your name or not. Thanks for the $5. He says, I've been using Linux on the desktop since 2010. The paradox of choice is actually getting annoying. No cap. I don't know what that means. I'm much too old for the whole no cap thing. But thanks for the $5. Nerdgasm Cody, go ahead.
I'd say that a number of the things that were brought up here is kind of goes back to money talks in a few different ways. Money gets put in by Microsoft and Microsoft affiliates into schools and organizations and stuff like that to use them, use Microsoft systems, and that's been the case for a long time. And between that and advertising, money is advertising. It then becomes a standard, and once there's a standard that's set, whether it should be or not, it is what it is. And then it tends to be then what compliances are built off of. And because Microsoft is spending the money for advertising and teaching and putting in the schools and all that sort of stuff, that tends to be what people know. They don't know Linux, they don't know other options. And it's not just that they don't know it on its base, is they don't know the details. And then when it comes to the business world and general business usage, that matters to a degree because of compliances and regulations. And a lot of people just aren't going to know if whatever Linux distribution or whatever application from Linux or open source or otherwise is necessarily compliant with the rules that they need to follow or that their software needs to follow. So that tends to be a big problem in getting people and organizations moved over to these sorts of things. And that's going to continue to be a thing. And then touching on old hardware and stuff, like I'd say this newest round of Windows has been the biggest push of pushing out hardware that is still plenty good. Because of the hard requirements that they're putting into Windows 11 that are continually blocking hardware that they don't deem new enough to be used with it. They didn't used to with older versions of Windows after an update put up additional notices and stuff that, oh no, you can't use this, or you're going to have problems with this or that because you're running an older piece of hardware. It would just be if there is an actual problem, then that problem would manifest. They wouldn't be telling you there is going to be some problem without there actually being a problem, or they wouldn't be creating a problem, which is what they're doing now. Like they're preventing you from getting updates or going to certain builds and stuff because your hardware is a little bit too old. I mean, like I was running as a test Windows 8, Windows 8.1 on like 90s computers that had like a quarter gig of RAM and stuff. It wasn't supposed to run on a quarter gig of RAM, but it wasn't that hard to make it happen. And then it would work crappily, yes, but it would just work. It wouldn't in Windows come up with pop-ups like, oh no, this, that. So I really do hope that this more recent move with Windows 11 is going to drive more people over in a bigger way than it has with previous previous Windows releases. I know it won't be to the levels that any of us really want, but and there's going to be so much waste that happens. So much is going to get thrown in the landfills and go to the recyclers and stuff like that. But it is what it is, and I hope that it gets better.
It will drive some, but it always drives some. It's going to be a very small amount.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why it's going to be so small is because people don't install Windows.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
They're never going to find out that it's not going to work on their new computer because they don't like Windows is. And unless Microsoft sends out like advertising, which I wouldn't put it past them on a PC that isn't compatible with Windows 11 and say, hey, would you like Windows 11? Go buy a new
They
computer.
They actually are doing that. Windows 10 computers are getting notices. Hey, your computer isn't capable of running Windows 11. It's time to buy a new computer. They've been pushing those out for a couple years now, and it's hardware that is still plenty good. So it's really sad, and like, yeah, that it's going to be such a small subset of users, but I think that it will be a slightly larger subset of users than in previous times due to the way that it is being pushed and is having additional restrictions on it.
I guess I'm just cynical because we've heard it every single time.
No, the cynicism is right. Like, I'm not saying that it's going to be huge or anything. It's still a tiny subset, but it's a slightly larger subset than before, because the people who would just install the newer version themselves now are actually running into hard roadblocks where it's like their Windows build will come up with an extra watermark you have to get rid of, and it will prevent you from getting normal updates, because you are not running a processor they approve. So there is a smaller subset, but slightly larger than before. Slightly.
Yeah. Dunnan, go ahead.
Yeah, some people think that just because a program doesn't run natively on Linux, that they won't be able to run it on a Linux computer. Some people are unaware of programs like Vine that allow them to run Windows programs on the Linux computers. But it is also true that Wine does not work with all programs. There have been some difficulties regarding CAD programs, and I think in some industries where they use specific CAD programs that's only for Windows, they're going to stick with Windows if it isn't compatible with Vine, because there is CAD alternatives for that run natively on Linux, like FreeCAD. But if you've been using like Creo Paramedics your whole life, you're going to stick with it, and that's so I'm not sure how well is the compatibility with some CAD programs and Vine. Do you have any awareness of that?
Yeah, I don't know with the cat. I just know from people who talk to me that most of the time, Omega Tux, I'm gonna need you to stay muted, please. We got background noise. Thank you. The thing that I know that from people who say stuff, that if you're big into CAD, chances are you're a fan of whatever CAD software you use, and you don't want to switch. So I think for the vast majority of people, if they're in that industry or whatever, they're going to stick with whatever it is they're using already, because it takes a lot of training and to use that stuff and whatever. Omega Text, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. Now, just to follow up what Cody said earlier, it'll push the needle a little bit towards new Linux users, but I also see that it's going to push the users into the Mac world or the Apple world and all their new M chips, the M4s, and all those new chips. So I don't think we're going to see a major pickup of new Linux users. We'll see some, but I think they're going to say, oh, let's try the Mac system now, and then they get into that ecosystem, or they're in that walled garden, and they'll never leave the Mac system. So I mean, like I said, some people who know that you could install OSs, and especially that good old hardware that they still have from a few years ago. I mean, you and I all know, and the people in this room know, that you could throw a nice distro in there and that hardware is going to hum. And some people will switch over to Linux, but I see more people adopting what's in the market. Again, consumerism is going to win out, and they're just going to go buy a new shiny Mac, M4 or new MacBook, or new Apple laptop. So I mean, it's just consumerism. But you're right; it's a shame to see that hardware just thrown in the landfill or in recyclers, or that hardware. I'd be glad to pick up some of that old hardware, but that the Windows 10 is pushing those people to get Windows 11 in their computers. But I just wanted to say, yeah, I don't think we're going to see a major tick in Linux users, but we'll see some, and I see a lot of them bleeding out to the Apple world.
You are absolutely correct on that. And I think it goes to the point of the money talks, and advertising does work to a decent extent. Whether or not it's convincing people to use a specific thing, it controls what people are aware of. It controls what it's in their minds to some degree. So that's going to, make people think, what are the options I have? Oh, I can go buy the Mac. I hear the Macs run great. Oh, those battery lives are freaking fantastic. Of course, yeah. Why shouldn't I go with that? Like, they get updated forever, and and the battery life is great. They run well. It'd be silly for me to continue going with Windows when I could just pick up the Mac and be good for life. Is what a lot of people, I think, are kind of thinking to some degree.
So, just kind of off from that, if Omega Text, you said you wanted to pick up some of that hardware right after Windows 10 goes end of life, check eBay. Because especially a lot of companies who have to update or have chosen to update immediately will put their old stuff up on eBay, so you can go get that stuff usually pretty cheap. And that will happen in stages over the course of the next few years, as companies specifically stop paying for the extra support that Microsoft will offer. So check eBay, that stuff, because a lot of people do put their computers and stuff in this situation up online to sell for used. So if you're really interested in that kind of thing. All right, so I do have another one. So, and this kind of goes back to something that a lot of people have already said, but Linux is only for developers. Somebody else already said that. And then there's the big one, that Linux is only a waste of time, and it's like a time sink. That one really bugs me, because it's one of those things that it's true if you don't know any better, or if you don't know where else to look. Because if your only experience with Linux is Unix porn or YouTube, because me and my fellow YouTubers are the driving force behind this stereotype in some ways. We all use weird distros, Arch or OpenSUSE or stuff like that. None of us, there's not a single Linux YouTuber out there I know that actually uses Ubuntu. Maybe there's like one or two, but they're just small and I don't know them. War Thunder, you're the only Linux Mint YouTuber out there that I know. So none of the people who are celebrities in the Linux sphere. God, that's just the stupidest thing I've ever said in my life. But none of us use normal distros. None of us treat Linux as a normal productivity solution. We all treat it just as a hobby. So we drive this stereotype forward, to be sure. And maybe that's something that we could do better on. But to say that it's a complete waste of time kind of just shows how little you know about Linux. It goes back to what I said earlier. My first one was that, people think that you can't get work done on Linux, and that's obviously 100% not true. So, I'm pretty sure Jitsi is playing weirdness with the order again. So who had their hand up first? Nobody knows. All right. Well, we'll just go with where it is then. Dunnan, go ahead.
As you said, regarding whether there's no normal people using Linux, actually, if you do not have seen, PewDiePie uses Linux, and I think he on one system he uses Linux Mint, and on his other he uses Arch. But that's just an example of normal gamers or normal YouTube celebrities using Linux. So there are some.
Yeah, I saw that he was using Linux, but I don't think that he actually did an actual video on it. It was just mentioned during a PC build that he did. Des, go ahead.
I'm using Linux Mint as well, but with a bunch of tweaks that kind of makes it my own distro.
War Thunder says that Linux Mint is perfect and you should stop tweaking it. War Thunder, go ahead.
Oh, you would say that. No, I think people should make their computer what they want it to be.
I know, I
Computers
was
are
just
just tools to
trolling.
get the job done, you know. No, I was going to say, I know Tom from Switch to Linux Daily's Mint. He's actually the reason I tried it in the first place. I caught a random video of his talking about it. I think Craft Computing tried Zorn OS, and I think his laptop still has it. He couldn't edit with his day business on it, but he has kept it around for his laptop that he takes and travels with. I'm not sure about Wendell, whether he uses Ubuntu or whether he uses Pop OS. I've seen both. And the machine he has doing his background and whatnot's Pop OS, because I'm a nerd and I know what the decorations look like in Pop OS. But yeah, you're not wrong. Not a lot of mainstream people use it, which I think is kind of funny. But I guess by the time you're technical enough to do what some of these other YouTubers are, you just use whatever you want.
If I were a good person, I would make my next 2-year Linux challenge Linux Mint, but I'm not doing that. I would literally rather use Windows. That's not true. It's close though. Fraggle, go ahead. I'm trolling War Thunder, by the way.
To loop back to a little bit on the hardware and stuff like that, I think another stereotype is that, you know, us as Linux users are against like proprietary drivers, hardware, and or software too, which really isn't the case. I mean, sure, we prefer FOSS solutions and stuff like that, but and I mean, there are some that are very like dead hard set against using anything proprietary, but personally, I would love nothing more than to have more hardware vendors, you know, creating like official Linux drivers or open source drivers for their hardware. It would make things a lot easier and a lot better for a lot more people. Like I use Rock'em and HIP, which is an AMD based thing. It's kind of like CUDA, but it's for AMD. And because I do a lot of stuff with Blender and everything like that, and it enables me to use the Cycles render engine, which is a more realistic, it creates more realistic results when you're rendering out and everything like that. And I have to jump through hoops to get it to work. They only support Red Hat, SUSE Enterprise Linux, or SUSE Enterprise Linux, and Ubuntu. And those are the only 3 distros that they officially support, because those are the 3 really commercial distros, right? Everybody else just has to either run it in like through like a container, like DistroBox or Podman.
I'm sorry,
or
Fraggle.
like a Docker.
What program did you say? I missed the program that you were talking about.
Blender.
Really? Why don't you just use the Flatpak?
What? Because it still wouldn't because that wouldn't work with Rock'em or HIP.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. Blender itself works fine, and if I want like a fast render or more cartoony or not realistic, or more of like a stylized type of render outcome, then I can use the Eevee render engine, where works fine. It uses the CPU more than the GPU. But if I really want to use my GPU for rendering out a Blender, I have to. Arch, obviously, they have it in their repo. So it works well with Arch too, but it's just not officially supported by AMD themselves.
Yeah.
So I'd really like to see a lot more hardware vendors officially support open source, or, you know, develop open source drivers and potentially Windows closed source drivers too, hand in hand. But yeah, I'd like to see that.
Yeah. See, the reason why I interrupted there and asked you what program you're talking about is because I missed it, and then I heard what you're talking about, and I thought you were talking about DaVinci Resolve, because it's literally exactly the same situation. I don't think they're the same distros, but they only support like Rocky Linux and CentOS or some crazy distros, so things that nobody uses as a desktop operating system, right? and it has the same issue with Rockham, right? It has the exact same problem there. And if you want to run it, you have to run it in DistroBox. That's what I do on this computer. Now, the funny thing it is if you use Bluefin, it runs fucking perfectly. Like it has everything except for client-side decorations. Like it has access to all of the codecs and stuff that you need. It has access to literally everything. It works great. So it's very, I think, distro specific for a lot of those things. I didn't know the problems with Blender, but for me, I've had tons of problems with Resolve on every distro that I've ever tried, except for Bluefin. It's really weird.
Yeah, I think just to reiterate the stereotype that Linux users are like anti-proprietary software and stuff like that, I don't think that's the case. I think what we hate the most is the fact that the proprietary software developers don't develop for Linux.
Yeah,
I think we hate that more than
Yeah.
proprietary software itself.
Well, the vast majority of people, I mean, there are obviously Linux users who are zealots when it comes to open source, right? But the vast majority of us use proprietary software quite a bit. Like I use Vivaldi as my main browser. You know, there are tons of things that I use that are proprietary, and I'm happy to do so. I'm a Vivaldi fanboy. And you're right. Like I love Resolve. I would preach Resolve to the heavens if it was easy to install. They just made a fucking flat pack to make it easy to install. I don't even care about how slow it would be. Like it doesn't matter how slow it would render. That wouldn't matter to me at all as long as the codecs were included, right? So I think the idea that if you use Linux, you're automatically a FOSS, superiority kind of person is way off base for the vast majority. Those do exist, but it's definitely not everybody. War Thunder, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say with your comments on Resolve, if you run in a Ubuntu or Debian-based distro, there are repositories to get Rockham installed. That's not too difficult. I have a stick here with Fedora on it I was messing with the other day, and Rockham is actually in the Fedora package repositories and whatnot, and it's possible. Although in Fedora, there's a copper repo to help you install Resolve that doesn't suck. It's actually kind of nice. I haven't tried OpenSUSE yet. I have a SATA-based one of these that I was going to install to and muck around with to see if I could figure out why it doesn't work for you.
Okay, on OpenSUSE, the problem is that in order to get Rockham to work right, you have to install the proprietary AMD drivers, and it's impossible. You can't do it. Like it's literally you cannot do it. If you go into their forums and go into OpenSUSE forums and ask them, "Hey, how do I do this?" Everyone will tell you it can't be done. And the few people who will say, "Oh, I did it," can't tell you how they did it. I don't believe you did it. So I spent probably 2 weeks trying to install the proprietary AMD drivers, the AMD GPU Pro or whatever it is, and every time I'd find some like new trick or something like somebody claimed that wouldn't work. Part of it has to do with the fact that in order to get it to run, you have to convert it into a repository for OpenSUSE to actually recognize it to install it. And the URLs or something do something funny. So there's something around that. And then there's
several things going on then.
And then there's some dependency stuff that you have to have that either don't exist on OpenSUSE or are the wrong versions. So there's some of the stuff in the open build service that exists there, but they haven't been updated in like 3 or 4 years. Someone did do an AMD GPU Pro package in the open build service, but it is phenomenally old and won't work with anything recent when it comes to Resolve. So it's completely useless.
I mean, I'm willing to sit here and strangle a gecko to find out if there's a way to do it. Because to be fair, the way Ubuntu used to have to do it is you had to install the proprietary driver to get Rockham working. And there was somebody on a Mint forum and there was somebody on another forum I wrote down from somewhere that figured out how to add AMD's repository in that case and just install the Rockham libraries and nothing else and still keep the open source driver.
I know that this has become a little bit of a OpenSUSE bash thing, but OpenSUSE doesn't like the proprietary drivers of NVIDIA or AMD, and they make it phenomenally hard to install them. And NVIDIA is way easier. It's 100% possible, but if you install from the main repositories, there's a good chance you're going to get an older driver, because the guy who maintains it doesn't always update it. So sometimes it's like 2 versions behind. Sometimes it's the main one. Sometimes it's 2 versions behind. No one does the AMD GPU Pro because no one they think that no one needs it, because the open source version is is just what everybody uses, right? So
Yeah.
I have so many. I've ranted enough. So does anybody else? Yeah, does anybody else have any stereotypes about Linux that they would like to debunk before we wrap this up? Going once, going twice. All right. I think I know that it is a little bit early, but my dog is interested in leaving this room. So we're going to go ahead and wrap this up for this evening. So those of you who watched us live, thank you so very, very much for watching us. We do appreciate it. Matt, would you pay for DaVinci Resolve on Linux, though? I did pay for DaVinci Resolve. I paid for it, and it still doesn't work. So I mean, it works. You just have to be very distro specific in what you use, right? So yeah, I paid for Studio, and I have pled with them to make it easier to install. Because even on Bluefin, it's not easy to install. You still have to run a script, basically. The funny thing is, it's actually installing an app image. So if they just gave us the freaking app image, I could do that. Like, I know how to do it. I wouldn't like it, but I could do it. Anyways, that's neither here nor there. Anyways, thanks everybody for watching live. If you want to join in on one of our fancy lugs here, we do this twice a month. The first one is the second Thursday of every month. That's at 11:15 p.m. Eastern Time. You can join us on the main thing here and actually participate, or you can join us in the stream. Doesn't matter which one. Even if you join us on the main one, you don't have to talk. A lot of people just join and hang out, which is fine. So you don't have to have a microphone or anything. If you don't plan on talking, you can still be in the room. The second one is like this one. It's on the 4th Thursday of every month. That's at 8:15 p.m. Eastern Time. There is a Nextcloud calendar, which you can find on the Discord server or in various other places if you want to keep track of that. Or you can just set up recurring events on every second and third Thursday of every month to remind you. It's not that hard. It doesn't change. It'll always be this way. So there you go. Anyways, the stream, for those of you who want to watch this afterwards, will stay up and live. You can comment or whatever and watch us however you want. So there you go. Thanks everybody for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.